5 months after the launch of Base Set came Pokemon's first expansion, Jungle. The most important card to come out of the set was one that permanently replaced Farfetch'd as the Hitmonchan counter of choice, Scyther. Scyther was another 70 HP basic, which both resisted fighting and had no retreat cost. Having no retreat cost was and is a very rare property in Pokemon, and enabled a number of unique plays, most importantly allowing Scyther to come in and threaten or KO Hitmonchan, then switch out for free if something switched in that could threaten it. Scyther's first attack cost 1 grass energy and doubled the power of its second. Slash dealt 30 damage for 3 colorless, so you could either run Scyther in a green deck and have the option to power up and swing for 60, or simply splash it into anything and run it purely as a 30 damage Hitmonchan counter. However, because of the general lack of color restrictions, there was also nothing stopping Haymaker from running Scyther, and that's exactly what it did. Scyther came to replace Farfetch'd in the Haymaker core, which continued to dominate weekly locals until the end of this format. Other key Pokemon introduced by Jungle included Wigglytuff, which could cheaply dole out 60 damage hits with Do the Wave for the same cost as Scyther's Slash, and Dodrio, whose Pokemon power reduced the retreat cost of active Pokemon by 1 and stacked with multiple Dodrio in play. Between Jungle and the third booster set, a major promo card release became a serious thorn in the side of Haymaker. This was the unnumbered promotional card Mewtwo, which was distributed in the Pocket Monsters fanbook guide, along with Super Energy Retrieval. Mewtwo was another 70 HP basic that dealt 40 damage for 3 energy, but it was notable for 2 reasons. The first was that its 1 energy attack attached 2 energy to it from the discard pile, allowing any cards with discard costs like Professor Oak or Computer Search to be used to accelerate energy and use Cyburn early. And the second was that Hitmonchan was weak to Mewtwo. As a Psychic-type Pokemon, Mewtwo was actually weak to itself, which resulted in the card becoming its own best counter for a time. There was now immense demand for the promo, which had become the new Haymaker. Thankfully, the Mewtwo promo was reprinted with alternate artwork 1 month later in CoroCoro magazine. And with CoroCoro having about 1.8 million subscribers at the time, and another 20 million in off-the-rack sales, there was no shortage of the card available. Fossil launched late that June, bringing with it 2 counters to Mewtwo that helped balance out the metagame. The first was Ditto, whose Pokemon power transformed it into a copy of whatever it was facing, and which allowed any energy attached to it to be of any color. The second was Mew, whose Psywave cost only 1 energy and dealt 10 damage for every energy attached to the defending Pokemon. Since Mewtwo was Psychic weak, Mew would deal 60 damage to it if it had its standard 3 energy attached, leaving Mew just 1+ power away from picking up the knockout, while Ditto would always KO Mewtwo as long as it could attack. There were a number of ways of countering Ditto, the most popular being to switch in a low HP Pokemon with high damage output capable of KOing itself, like Rattata or Diglett. This set also included a potential Scyther counter in Magmar, another big basic 70 HP Pokemon whose high damage output came from its ability to deal 20 through Smog and inflict poison, which over 1 turn cycle was functionally 40 damage in a neutral matchup and 60 on Scyther. But Fossil's biggest contribution of all was in the form of 2 Pokemon that foreshadowed the arrival of something bolder than Haymaker, Lockdown. Psyduck was an offensively unimpressive Pokemon with a very impressive utility attack. Headache prevented the opponent from using trainer cards on their next turn, locking them out of draw power, search effects, recovery, switching, or any kind of effect that could modify board state. Because it dealt no damage, Psyduck was a sitting duck for any kind of offensive presence, but it was a very powerful way to stall the opponent's momentum while building up your side of the field unimpeded. And it would not be the last card to lock out trainers. The other big card to come out from the set was Muck, whose Pokemon power disabled all powers except its own. In Fossil, this was primarily to disable Dodrio, and on the occasion that it was actually run, Blastoise. But in the months to come, Muck would become an essential counter card to opposing trainer locks, because of one card in particular that nobody wanted to play against: Dark Vileplume. Dark Vileplume was a Stage 2 evolution introduced in the very next expansion, Team Rocket.
世界の破壊を防ぐため、世界の平和を守るため、愛と真実の悪を貫くラブリーチャーミーな敵役、武蔵小次郎、銀河をかけるロケット団の2人にはホワイトホール、白い明日が待ってるぞ。
Team Rocket was more or less the final set of the classic Pokemon trading card game, although it wasn't intended to be. The set focused on dark Pokemon, evolutions of existing Pokemon that were corrupted in some way by Team Rocket. Dark Vileplume's ability, Hay Fever, prevented all players from playing any trainer cards, acting as an incarnation of Last that lasted the entire game. In theory, these kinds of global effects were fair, because all players were affected, but in practice, Dark Vileplume could freeze the board state in favor of the player that set it up. Its one and only counter was Muck, so you were either running Dark Plume to disable the opponent's trainers after you had already burned through yours, or you were running Muck to disable opposing Dark Plume so that you could actually play the game. And its effect was only exacerbated by Team Rocket introducing the trainer card Rocket's Sneak Attack, which forced the opponent to reveal their hand and shuffle a trainer card of the user's choosing into their deck. Remember that search and draw effects in Pokemon were and are insane. Getting Sneak Attack in hand was not difficult, and what the card did in practice was raise the variance in the game so that winning the opening coin flip to decide who goes first became much more important, as whoever went first was also getting their sneak attacks in first. You could begin the game by denying the opponent the use of their trainers with Sneak Attack and or Psyduck for 2 turns, then on the third have Dark Vileplume out and completely lock their trainers until the end of time. It was cards like these that made Team Rocket a huge step down from Fossil. At the same time, this was still the height of Pokemania in Japan, and there was a lot of optimism going forward for the franchise. The anime series had started airing around the same time the Mewtwo fanbook promo came out, and in June Nintendo had announced Pocket Monsters 2, later renamed Pokemon Gold and Silver, would be coming out in the fall of 1997. The same month that the Team Rocket expansion hit, the famous Space World demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver was presented at Nintendo's annual trade show. At the same time, it was announced that Gold and Silver would not reach their end-of-year release date, and the games were delayed to March 1998. Pokemon was going strong. Fans were excited for what was coming next, and one bad meta wasn't going to stop that. The next expansion, Leaders Stadium, was scheduled for a March 1998 launch simultaneous to Gold and Silver, and was to introduce a new stadium card mechanic while also being accompanied by Pokemon's first formal starter decks, themed after the gym leaders of the video games. Then, in December 1997, disaster struck. The 38th episode of the Pokemon TV anime series, Cyber Soldier Porygon, was set to air that evening at 6:30 p.m. Japanese Standard Time. This was at the height of Pokemon's national popularity. 37 TV stations were broadcasting the episode nationwide, and more than 4.5 million households were tuned in. Unbeknownst to those working on the episode at the animation studio Ohm, Cyber Soldier Porygon contained a 6-second sequence of strobe lights blinking at a rate of 12 Hz, exactly right to trigger seizures in someone with epilepsy. At approximately 6:50 p.m., almost 700 undiagnosed photosensitive viewers experienced their first symptoms. In the most mild cases, headache, nausea, and dizziness, but for many more the episode triggered serious effects including blindness, fainting, and convulsions. Almost 700 children were picked up by ambulance crews, 375 girls and 310 boys, with over 150 of them being hospitalized. Newsreels rebroadcasting the clips for context actually made the situation worse, as people who had not seen the episode were exposed to the same sequence and began to experience symptoms of their own. CNN reported that around 200 people were still hospitalized after the crisis. It was the only incident of mass epilepsy in history, and only possible because of the technology of mass broadcasting and the popularity of one show that happened to use exactly the wrong technique. The mass media industry was completely unprepared for this type of situation. The Pokemon shocks, or Pokemon panic as the Japanese media called them, triggered emergency meetings by Japan's Ministry of Health and an investigation by the National Police Agency. Nintendo stock shares fell 5% in less than 24 hours, and TV Tokyo subsequently put the anime series on a 4-month hiatus. Many believed the Pokemon anime would be cancelled. The Pokemon shocks set off a complete reform of Japanese broadcast standards. Following this, all TV anime featured warnings at the beginnings of episodes, telling viewers to watch shows in brightly lit rooms while an adequate distance away from the television. The amount of flicker that could be instituted in a 1-second period was formally limited by TV stations, and the kinds of shapes and flashes that could be used in TV anime were strictly regulated to prevent a repeat incident. Even video games were affected, as the subsequent implementation of epilepsy testing on products eventually led Nintendo to artificially darken their re-releases of older games and remove flashing effects. The cultural impact of the shocks would endure for many years more, inspiring the fictional Deadly Flash virus in the .hack franchise and numerous parodies in the Western world. In response to the incident, Ishihara Tsunekazu began a series of meetings that would eventually lead to the formation of a company that would serve as the ultimate arbitrator and supervisor of all Pokémon products. No corner of the franchise was unaffected by the shocks, and so the company Ishihara appointed himself CEO of would handle all of them. The Pokémon Company, or TPC for short. TPC was formally established in April of 1998, 1 week after the anime series resumed airing on its new time slot and 1 week after Pokémon Yellow launched in Japan. That episode was accompanied by numerous public apologies from Game Freak, Creatures, TV Tokyo, and of course TPC itself. Pokémon, which had started out as a small passion project before growing so explosively popular no one could rein it in, was now trying to shoot down the Death Star, and Ishihara didn't have the force to help him. Every decision made by the company after this point had to be perfect to preserve not just the Pokémon brand, but also their livelihoods. TPC had to earn the trust of the general public in the aftermath of the shocks, something that had previously been assumed in Pokémon's relationship to consumers. This brings us back to the trading card game. The last major expansion, Team Rocket, had launched 1 month before the shocks in November 1997. The next set, Leaders Stadium, had originally been scheduled for a March 1998 launch simultaneous to Pokémon Gold and Silver, and as late as February was still listed for March in CoroCoro magazine. But the shocks and the founding of TPC led to a fundamental restructure of Pokémon's long-term game plan. Ishihara admitted that he had previously seen Gold and Silver as the finish line for the franchise, and even Yamauchi Hiroshi, then president of Nintendo, was saying Pokémon couldn't last forever. While even in January 98, Pokémon Gold and Silver was still listed for a late March launch by CoroCoro, the formation of TPC directed the franchise to an entirely different, longer-term endgame. Immediately before Gold and Silver were supposed to come out, the games were postponed indefinitely, and the release date for the Leaders Stadium booster set was quietly pulled. From the leaked prototype, we know that the Space World version of Gold and Silver was almost completely scrapped at this time, and that the final game would eventually launch in November 1999 after going through another development cycle. But what happened to the trading card game? Well, in place of Leaders Stadium, Media Factory began to put out a series of booster sheets, sometimes called the vending machine cards in English. These were printed sheets with 3 face-down cards printed on one side and promotional copy on the other. Those face-down cards could be popped out of the sheet, revealing a randomized set of Pokémon cards like any other. The vacant 4th slot contained, depending on the set, either cardboard damage counters and a coin that could be popped out in much the same way, or a display card with sample deck lists showing how players could use the cards together. The sheets were distributed in specialized vending machines within large slots, which would be placed outside a card shop or other store. Customers would put a 100-yen coin in the slot and turn the crank to push a sheet out. The set sizes for the booster sheets were much smaller than a normal expansion, with only 36 playable cards in each set, and the third set contained additional joke cards that couldn't be used in official play, similar to Magic the Gathering's Unglued set. Moreover, the first 2 sets contributed very little to the game. There were only a handful of new, low-impact trainer cards, no new species of Pokémon introduced, and of all the Pokémon cards printed in the set, only a few commons changed up the metagame by buffing the existing Dark Vileplume trainer lock. The set's rares were worthless as singles. It was impossible to draft the expansion, and consequently the booster sheets weren't popular with the kinds of hobby stores that were hosting weekly events for the game. But the booster sheet series filled out almost all of 1998, with new product launches in March, June, and November. In between booster sheet releases, Media Factory trickled out 4 theme decks based on the gym leaders represented in Leaders Stadium, which shared their trainer cards with the set itself but had exclusive Pokémon not found in the expansion. These decks came out in April, right as the anime resumed airing, and July, and the last booster sheet expansion ended up overlapping its release cycle with Leaders Stadium. While the gym leader theme decks added new cards to the game that kept core players engaged, like Misty's Tears, Celadon City Gym, and Secret Mission, the purpose of these vending machine sets was to fill time and keep the Pokémon TCG brand visible from the street, while the companies involved rode out the aftermath of the Porygon controversy, so that Leaders Stadium could be released according to its original launch plan, right before Gold and Silver came out, in an environment with a lot of hype that would drive businesses to place large orders of sealed product. Creatures, Media Factory, and TPC were stalling for time. As for Ishihara, The formation of TPC meant that the endgame was now no endgame. Pokémon would continue in perpetuity, as an eternal and evergreen brand, roping in new kids with each generation. Like Doraemon, Saizaia-san, or Mickey Mouse, Pokémon and Pikachu were to be a permanent fixture of Japanese popular culture, with TPC as its Disney and Ishihara as its Walt. There was no finish line, and there never would be.